Fabiola, a young black woman.
Therapy helps us understand our emotions, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it can help us improve our functionality and quality of life. 62% of patients with major depressive disorder showed improvement after psychotherapy. But people's views on therapy are mixed. Some people believe that therapy isn't for them.
In Latino culture, that's just not something that's readily talked about or on the table.
They're just like, you need to replace your thoughts with positive thoughts, and that's not helpful.
While others say,
therapy has helped me to be a better writer and a better lover, a better son, all those things. It's literally been life-changing for me.
One important thing about going to therapy is realizing that you are in control of your own narrative.
I look at therapy like I'm walking onto a construction site and I am the product that we're building.
everyone's experience with therapy is different, and whether someone finds value in it can be subjective. But if we look closer, we might even realize that our views on therapy are limited, since they so often center psychotherapy and leave out a much bigger world of healing.
Therapy was created from a Eurocentric lens for individuals that come from a Eurocentric background.
In a year that was especially challenging, the mental health conversation is more important than ever. And that got me thinking, is therapy for everyone?
Words appear on a light board. Is therapy for everyone? White titles are sketched in. Glad you asked, Season 2. Fabiola sits with fellow hosts Lee and Joss.
Hey, y'all.
Hey.
So, therapy, was that ever something that crossed your mind?
I've never really thought about therapy.
I think I always thought of therapy as you pay someone to listen to you talk about yourself for an hour.
Yeah.
It didn't really cross my mind that even though probably I had some of the hardest times ever this year, that I should go that route.
For me, talking to a therapist, just having someone to share things that I don't feel comfortable sharing with my partner, my family, and having someone who's non-judgmental is something that really has fundamentally changed a lot for me. The number of people dealing with anxiety and also suicide during the pandemic has skyrocketed, and we know that therapy is highly effective for that. For severe anxiety, in January of 2020, we were at 71% of people reporting severe anxiety, and then by September, it was 80%. Also, the number of people reporting frequent suicidal ideation increased. But the problem is that a lot of people just are not accessing therapy. I have a report here from the city's mental health arm. We see that there's clear disparity along racial lines of who's accessing therapy and who's not.
58% of depressed white people are receiving therapy, whereas only 30% of depressed Black people are getting that treatment.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so my question is, in a city like New York City, why is it still that just white people are getting therapy in a way that their Black and brown counterparts aren't?
If I had to guess, it would be access to it.
On my worst days, that's when I'm like, okay, I need help. And then I start looking for help. And then I realize I can't afford help.
And then even if they do take your insurance, their office might not be accessible. On top of that, your therapist might be ableist.
But not a lot of them speak a lot of our native tongues, you know, like a lot of them operate in English.
It's really all about what will society say. The classic log kya kahenge, what's everyone else gonna say?
A sign appears. Barriers to access.
So I want to talk to you because I know that 1 in 5 Americans lives with a mental illness, but about 60% of people aren't receiving the care that they need. How come so many people aren't accessing therapy?
So a main one, not the only, is money. So you're thinking anywhere between 75 at the low end. I've seen as high as $600 an hour at the high end.
Wow.
Let's take patient A. Patient A is struggling with symptoms that we typically would associate with depression. She really would love to go see somebody, but her primary struggle is how to pay for it. What we know from a study by the National Council on Behavioral Health is that 42% of folks indicate that money is a primary reason why it makes it difficult to access mental health care.
In my journey with trying to seek out a therapist, it's always this question of, will my insurance cover this therapist? But my therapist just always seemed to be out of network. So why is that?
So there are a couple things. One is many don't take insurance, and for those who do, they're limited in terms of the numbers of types of insurance that they take. Part of the reason is this lack of parity between what you can charge and be reimbursed for as a mental health care provider. There are many providers who struggle with this idea of how much they get reimbursed. And so what ends up happening with a lot of providers is they just decide, I won't take insurance at all.
So who is patient B? What's going on with patient B?
So she has money or she has the right insurance to be able to pay, but there is a shortage. Research tells us that about 35% of people in the United States live in areas where they don't have access to mental health providers. For every 100,000 people in a rural area, there are only 9 psychologists. Wow. Which is mind-blowing. Yeah. Versus urban areas, for every 100,000 people, there are 33 psychologists. To be a little bit crass, going into the mental health field is not as sexy as going into some of these others. People who go into mental health fields are sort of at the lower end of the food chain in terms of how much money they're going to make.
So who is patient C?
Patient C is an Asian American young woman who also identifies as a member of the queer LGBTQ community. The trouble is not only availability of providers, but providers' cultural competence. Because she has multiple identities, which we all know now is intersectionality, the provider that she has access to is not necessarily someone who understands all facets of her identity. 86% of psychologists in the United States identify as white.
That's jarring to me.
If you're a white provider or, have any identity of privilege, the last thing you want to do is get your patient to teach you. You should be trying to learn on your own.
So now we are here at patient D. What's going on with patient D?
So patient D is an African-American Black man struggling with and managing post-traumatic stress disorder. There's always a hierarchy of health care concerns. Unfortunately, mental illness being probably the most stigmatized. A CBS poll found that 51% of the people surveyed said that stigma was an issue negatively impacting people who are struggling with their mental health, people with mental illness. How the world views people with mental illness, more often than not, is not positive.
Where does the stigma come from?
So stigma really has to do with the perceptions that we hold, and it impacts all of us. I think more so, though, it impacts how Black people are treated in relationship to mental illness. They're not met with open arms, come let us help you. They're literally met with life or death situations. So to understand stigma, you really have to look at the history.
Words appear, confined and stigmatized.
Many communities battle stigma around therapy and mental illness. Within the Black community, the stigma arises from a long and often dark history of how America has dealt with mental health. And I curated this exhibit to take us through that troubled history. Thank you for coming. Here are your headphones for the exhibit.
Thanks.
I'll see you at the end.
Sounds good.
Let's start at the beginning. For much of the 19th century, people living with mental illnesses were isolated in insane asylums. For the few Black patients, they were segregated from white people. They were forced to labor in the fields, conditions not very different from life on plantations. The other Black mentally ill patients were sent to jail or mental hospitals.
Photographs of the Civil War. Soldiers stand next to infantry guns.
As the country careened toward the Civil War, white people accused freed Black people of insanity as a means to wield control. Samuel Cartwright, an assistant surgeon general of the Confederacy, invented 2 mental disorders exclusively for Black people to explain their tendencies to flee captivity: drapetomania and diaesthesia ethiopica. His cure was, to quote, whip the devil out of them. By the 20th century, psychiatrists had started working on cures for mental illnesses. Through eugenics, the practice of improving the genetic composition of the human race through selective mating, the government forced the sterilization of more than 60,000 supposed feeble-minded individuals. This included promiscuous women, immigrants, and people of color.
This one is wild. This is a fittest family eugenics competition. At the eugenics building,
you can see sort of the language of science being used to justify whatever political action comes next.
By the middle of the 20th century, psychotropic drugs became the popular therapeutic treatment for mental illness. And following decades of overcrowding, neglect, and abuse in asylums, deinstitutionalization began in 1955 and resulted in the closure of state psychiatric hospitals and asylums. The reentry of people with mental illnesses back into society foreshadowed the challenges they'd face in the criminal justice system decades later.
Young white Americans Christoph and Cleo watch a projected film about race and psychiatry.
During the 1960s civil rights era, as Black Americans led protests for equality, the American Psychiatric Association deliberately changed the definition of schizophrenia to include aggression. Prior to this, it was described as largely harmless, docile condition exhibited by white patients. In 1968, two psychiatrists described schizophrenia as protest psychosis, which classified Black people as hostile and aggressive.
Protest psychosis? Holy
Wild.
In the years after, companies marketed pharmaceuticals directly to Black patients whom they felt were out of control.
It's like these are the modern versions of the diseases that Cartwright invented.
It doesn't even feel like these ads are designed for people struggling with schizophrenia. It feels like they are designed for fear-mongering.
Deinstitutionalization and other social forces, such as the criminalization of substance use, led to an overrepresentation of mentally ill people in prisons and jails.
I mean, if 37% of people in state and federal prisons have been told they've had a mental illness, it's like our prison system is basically functioning as that system of institutionalization previously did, but just without the intention of even trying to be remediative or a process of therapy. It's just about punishment.
Fabiola comes over and smiles at her colleagues.
You can now take off your headphones for the final portion of our exhibit.
Hello. Hello.
So I'm going to walk you through the final portion of the exhibit. If you can just walk along here with me. Race has always been intertwined with diagnoses and treatments for mental illness. So if you're a person of color categorized as mentally ill and you never received adequate treatment or adequate care, that could be a death sentence. Daniel Prude, Eleanor Bumpers, Walter Wallace Jr., Alfreda Longo, Angelo Quinto, and Ezel Ford. These are just a handful of names of people killed at the hands of police when they needed mental health services. So to close out our exhibit, I want to end with a statement from the American Psychiatric Association. Since the APA's inception, practitioners have at times subjected persons of African descent and indigenous people who suffer from mental illness to abusive treatment, experimentation, victimization in the name of scientific evidence, along with racialized theories that attempted to confirm their deficit status. These appalling past actions, as well as their harmful effects, are ingrained in the structure of psychiatric practice and continue to harm BIPOC's psychological well-being even today.
I feel like if we become more aware of how systems of oppression operate to disenfranchise people, that can be sort of a backdoor to removing the stigma to things that we think are not for us.
It's time to highlight those marginalized communities of therapy that we could really use today, not only for ourselves, but I think for the broader world.
So where do we go when the systems that are supposed to help us harm us? Fortunately, there are therapists who have been creating safe spaces to help us unpack and heal from our traumas.
A sign reads, Holistic Healing.
Now you can take in a nice deep inhale. As I bathe you in sound, just sit and take in the vibrations.
Fabiola sits with a woman in white who is making sounds by tapping and rubbing large glass vessels with beaters.
Perhaps you can take in a deep breath just to seal the practice. And when you're ready, you can shift your gaze.
Fabiola opens her eyes and smiles serenely.
Wow.
How was that for you?
That was incredible. I feel like I struggled to calm my mind and quiet my mind, and I feel like it's hard to ignore the sound, so this kind of helped me focus in a way. It kind of felt like I was escaping, with each new sound that you introduced, it was like it opened up this level of, I don't know, consciousness.
This is a part of how therapy can be unconventional and how it can actually bring in some of these indigenous practices that we know have been really profoundly healing for our communities for generations. It integrates that experience that is more holistic. So one question that I like to ask everyone whenever we're completing the practice is, how's your soul?
Ooh. I don't even know how to answer that because I feel like I'm always concerned with how my mind is doing, that I don't really question what's going on with my soul. I feel grounded in a sense, but not completely like at peace, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. The racial epidemic, the pandemic, and being a person that lies at the intersection of multiple identities that are marginalized and vulnerable really makes it so that ease is something that is a little bit more challenging for you to be able to acquire. It's important to offset stress with self-care practices. Whatever healing looks like for you to emphasize that. There's so many ways that healing can be introduced into our lives that steps outside of the 45 minutes that you have in a therapeutic space.
Therapy could be as simple as walking, in a forest and energy work, like Reiki type of work as well.
I've done a little bit of yoga in the past, but like that, it's just like not my thing. Like it feels like I'm too aware of my body around everybody else.
I think everybody's open to some level of holistic health, whether that be yoga, meditation, like even essential oils, and just the idea of self-care.
Humor, like just being able to laugh once or twice a day, like really a good belly laugh helps me tremendously, as well as a really, really good cry.
Different forms of therapy, whether they support talk therapy or supplant it, are finding their way out to the mainstream. I'm encouraged by the mental health advocacy movement on platforms like Instagram that are encouraging people to prioritize their mental health and figure out the kind of therapy that works for them. As for me, I took Dr. Bouquet's advice to heart. I'm on my way to spend some time in nature. I had a number of options to choose from, but landed on equine therapy. So I wanted to think more about the connection between my mind and body and how trauma manifests physically. I'm going to be doing therapeutic writing at Gallup NYC. I'm really excited.
Fabiola's with James Wilson, director of Gallup NYC.
When you're working with the horse, you have to be very in tune to what's happening on their side, right? So if I come in and I steamroll you with my opinions and my feelings, and it's just not going to work, right? Because the horse has his own feelings, his own opinions, so I have to partner with him. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, how you walk in here, none of those things matter to a horse.
Being on a horse, even you put somebody on a horse, a kid on a horse, that kid is more relaxed because it's something new. Never really had that experience.
So how do horses aid in therapy?
The horses can really feel your energy. Just their movement is really helpful for the riders. It helps them really to relax, She's just coming around to smell you and say hi. She appreciates the group.
Fabiola sits on the saddle of a horse, who's taking her around a sandy paddock.
Walk on, Sadie. Roll back.
And release. Good.
Walk on, Sadie.
Excellent.
Yay.
Very nice.
Trot on.
There you go. So nice firm, a little bit more pressure. There you go.
Nice.
And we can
walk on, Sadie.
Okay, we'll take a quiet lap around so you can process and relax.
Fabiola looks calm and relaxed. Holding onto the saddle as Sadie the horse trots around the paddock, with a woman in jodhpurs at the front guiding her gently by her reins.
Just feeling calm right now, feeling just relaxed. Listening to Sadie and understanding how my different hand placements affect her and direct her. That, for me, really is about focus and getting myself to remember to be present and mindful.
So before we get off, I want you to give her some pats.
Aww.
Right, we like to tell them that they did good for us,
Sadie,
especially
you
if
did
it's true, right?
such an amazing job. I feel so happy. I kind of want to cry. She's like, so, like, seriously, this was really sweet.
Oh, I'm glad you had such a good experience.
This was great.
It's okay.
I feel like such a crybaby, but I really did feel, just a connection, and she's just awesome.
And this is really what happens with the riders every day. Good, and then you slide. There you go.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sadie. I didn't expect to cry at the end of my time with Sadie, but I feel like I got so much from that experience, and I fully understand how therapy can help us improve our functionality and quality of life. But so many people can't access therapy.
I think Black people, whether we know it or not, the pain of our ancestors lives through our body as much as the beauty and the joy. White dominant society in general forces us to be stronger than we need to be in a lot of situations.
We're in this moment in American history where we're just scratching the surface of like coming to or acknowledge all of the trauma that this country has inflicted on people of color. Like, the least you can do, like, if it's not reparations, at least give us free therapy.
Do I think therapy
for
is for
everyone?
everyone?
I don't think therapy is for everybody.
Yes, therapy is for everyone.
I think that there is a type of therapy for everyone.
If we could reshape the medical industrial complex, then it could be for everyone.
We need to, as a nation, recognize that mental health is just as important as our physical health. Expanding access to different kinds of therapy can help more people find peace.
So what else are you noticing?
I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Let me start over. Everyone does this, by the way. It's not because I'm short. I'm glad you asked.
I'm glad you asked. See what we did there?
Vox Media Studios. YouTube Originals.